2024 gave us some amazing Yu-Gi-Oh! From the long reign of the Snake Eyes, to the Diabellstar and the Sinful Spoils connecting with the Fire Kings, from Labyrinth to Yubel taking the World Championship, and of course the release of Fiendsmith Engraver, a card that still defines the metagame today. But out of all the cards released in 2024, which one of them was the best? Today, we're going to be ranking the top 10 cards released in 2024, and honestly, these 10 cards are just the 10 best cards in the game. The power creep is real, folks. So sit back, relax, and enjoy as we go into number 10 with Transaction Rollback. Transaction Rollback is a normal trap card released in the first set this year, which was actually Maze of Millennia. You can pay half your life points, then target one normal trap in your opponent's graveyard, accept Transaction Rollback, and this effect becomes that card effect on activation. Or you can banish this card from your graveyard, but target a normal trap in your graveyard and then copy its effect. So, seemingly unassuming, but at the end of the day, this card was meta-defining and is still extremely impactful today. Transaction Rollback could be, back in the day, sent to the graveyard with cards like Beatrice, Lady of the Eternal, which has since been forbidden from play, partially, I believe, because of this card. And then on the opponent's turn, you can copy another trap that you can send with Beatrice or any other way, and then get rid of the card's cost completely and just apply the effect on activation. This, of course, in decks like Labyrinth, is super impactful because you can activate 2 Big Welcome Labyrinths per turn because there's no effect restriction, it just copies the effect itself. But of course, when Beatrice was legal, this card was used to copy cards like Nightmare Archfiends or Earthbound Release to create very obnoxious FTKs, and of course the Mayakashi and Shiranui trap card that essentially locks you out of special summoning for the entire turn. So even though this card didn't see a lot of play in many decks, in my opinion at least, this card was actually transformative in the way Yu-Gi-Oh! Is played, and it happened in the very beginning of the year, and this card is still a 3. In number 9, Metal Tronus. Metal Tronus was released in Legacy of Destruction, pretty tame set that introduced Tenpai Dragons, and it released as a super rare, the same way Konami has been doing for a while with a lot of new quick play board breakers like Final Bringer of the End Times and Vesper Girsu. With Metal Tronus, you can target one face-up non-token monster your opponent controls, and then you can special summon one monster from your hand, deck, or extra deck that has 2 or more of the same type, attribute, and or attack, but you negate its effects. If you do summon it, you can negate the targeted monster's effect on your opponent's side of the field, and after that, if those monsters have the same name, you can banish both, face down. And of course, your opponent cannot activate the targeted monster's effects in response to this card's activation. So, a lot to break down here. This card is very unique and has been seeing a lot of competitive play in a lot of people's side decks. Because this year, to be honest, a lot of the formats were pretty narrow in terms of deck representation. When you had Snake Eyes and Yubel at the top, pretty much everyone played those decks. And when everyone plays the same decks, as we saw in the beginning of the year, you can play cards like Lullaby of Obedience that can fetch basically any card from your opponent's deck and put it in your hand or special summon it to your field. So again, if everybody's playing the same deck, this card in the side deck is a perfect tool for the mirror match. And even if you don't necessarily want to banish your opponent's monsters face down, if your opponent, for example, controls a Light Fiend monster, you can just special summon for free a Light Fiend monster from your deck or extra deck, and then just use it to make a Fiendsmith's Requiem. This card either puts up a body or gets rid of your opponent's biggest threat. And even though this card is not like expensive or extremely meta-defining, this card has seen a lot of competitive play, and I think for the creative effect that it has, it deserves a spot on this list. At number 8, Bonfire. Bonfire is another card released in Maze of Millennia, imported from the OCG's Animation Chronicles, and basically changed the game on release. So you know, cards like Reinforcement of the Army that just add a warrior monster and have been limited for a millennium basically. So this is the same card, just for Pyros. You can add one level 4 or lower Pyro monster from your deck to your hand, and you can only activate one Bonfire per turn. Think about all the types in the game. How many of them have a direct searcher? You have, of course, cards like Reinforcement of the Army, that is limited to 1. You have cards like Silent Mining that requires you to send a card from your hand to the graveyard. You have cards like Bestial Magnamut that needs an end phase to resolve, and basically you have to wait a turn to resolve it. And then you have Bonfire that is at 3 copies and can add any Pyro from the deck to the hand. Obviously, the history of Pyros in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is pretty weak. Not a lot of archetypes or even monsters that were Pyro type were actually competitive in any way, shape, or form. However, in the year of 2023, in Age of Overlord, we got the Snake Eyes. And Snake Eye Poplar, released in 2024, are both pyros and are both extremely strong cards that evolve into insane combos, and again, right now are limited just because of that. But it doesn't end there. With the release of Crossover Breakers, we got a new Pyro archetype that is basically half Pyro, half Thunder, called Dryzeal, and it is currently controlling the meta, with its best starter being Pyro, and of course Bonfire being at 3. Bonfire is not that high on the list because some cards are just a little bit better, but Bonfire is a card that, like Reinforcement of the Army, can very well see itself on the limited list. And number 7, Dominus Impulse. Dominus Impulse is a normal trap card released in Rage of the Abyss, honestly the last core set, and already making it to the top 10 best cards of 2024 in my opinion. Dominus Impulse is a part of an archetype of trap cards called Dominus, with the previous Dominus Purge negating an effect that adds a card from the deck to the hand. But Dominus Impulse, if your opponent controls a card, you can activate it from the hand, and when a card or effect that is activated that includes an effect that special summons a monster or monsters, you can negate that effect. Then, if you have a trap in the graveyard, you destroy that card. And if you chose to activate it from your hand, you cannot activate the effects of light, earth, and wind monsters for the rest of the duel. You can only activate one Dominus Impulse per turn. Now, there's a lot to unpack here. This card is basically an infinite impermanent combined with a solemn warning. Given the fact that when monster hand traps are strong, people start playing Triple Tactics Thrust or Triple Tactics Talent in their deck to punish their opponent for interacting with monster effects, or when breaking a board, the Dominus trap cards kind of circumvent that by being trap cards that just don't lose those types of interaction. Maybe soon we will get a card that punishes you for activating trap cards, but for now, with Red Reboot banned, there's not really any way to stop this card. And with a lot of effects in the game, the strongest of them being able to special summon monsters to extend your combo or to start it, negating it directly from the hand is incredibly strong. Now, blocking you out of light, earth, and wind effects for the rest of the duel might seem a little bit harsh, but the decks that can play it benefit from it a lot. Decks like Tenpai Dragon that run all fire types or Labyrinth that run all dark types don't actually really care about this card. And also the newly released Malice deck. It's all darks. So this card is going to keep being competitive for a long time, and hopefully, or maybe not hopefully, we get some more Dominus cards in the future. At number 6, Phantom of Yubel. Phantom of Yubel was released in the latest Battles of Legend, Terminal Revenge, again as another import of a promo card released in one of the latest valuable books. Phantom of Yubel is a fusion monster, level 9, dark, and of course a fiend, and is a retrain of Yubel to give it a boss monster that fits the deck's strategy. The most incredible part about this card, and the reason why it is mandatory to put it on the list for 2024, is the fact that it must be special summoned from the extra deck by shuffling the above cards from your hand, field, and or graveyard back into the deck or extra deck. And it requires a Yubel monster plus a fiend with 0 attack and defense, which the Yubel deck is full of, with Samsara D Lotus, Yubel monsters themselves, and of course the Dark Beckoning Beast engine. And it's not even limited to summon once per turn. So at the peak of this deck's existence, people were playing 2 or 3 Phantom of Yubel to recycle resources back into the deck, but also get a monster negate. Because Phantom of Yubel's effect, when your opponent activates a monster effect, as a quick effect you contribute this card, and the activated effect becomes your opponent destroys one Yubel monster in their hand, deck, or field, which also circumvents unaffected monsters, which is incredibly powerful. So this card, you can summon it 2-3 times per turn, it recycles back all of your best resources back into the deck, and it is a once per turn monster negate. And it's so strong that on the last Forbidden Unlimited list, this card was limited, because it was just a free combo extender on top of a very early monster negate to play around any hand trap or Nibiru that you can just summon by shuffling cards from your hand, not starting a chain as the first action of your turn. This card is honestly busted. At number 5, Sanguine Summoning. Sanguine Summoning is the Tenpai Dragon field spell that, even though it was released only 7 months ago, it already has 3 limited cards on the Forbidden and Limited list, with Tenpai Dragon Chandra, Sanguine Kaiman, and Sanguine Summoning. Honestly, any one of the Tenpai Dragon cards can be on this list, because the deck continues to be one of the most oppressive, obnoxious going second decks ever in the history of Yu-Gi-Oh! And probably the easiest OTK of them all. I chose Second Summoning because of the effect that basically protects the deck from anything. Second Summoning says that during your main phase 1, fire dragon monsters you control are unaffected by your opponent's activated effect. So essentially, if you place this down successfully, you are protected throughout the entire main phase 1, and since this deck is a battle phase deck, it basically gives you a free pass into the battle phase. And of course, any field spell won't be good unless it also searches cards from the deck, right? During your main phase, you can add one Tenpai Dragon monster from your deck to your hand, then discard one card. And just to top it all off and connecting to the archetype's inspiration in Trident Dragion, if Second Summoning is destroyed during the battle phase, you can target a Dragon Synchro monster you control, double its attack. Tenpai Dragon is obviously a very oppressive strategy of going second and killing you within one battle phase. So of course, having all your starters be completely protected until you go into that battle phase is extremely strong. And given the fact that the Tenpai boss monster also prevents your opponent from activating any effects in the battle phase, with Sangenpai Transcendent Dragion, you could essentially be unable to activate any effects in the main phase with Sangen Summoning, and then if your opponent mates the Transcendent Dragion in main phase 1, you cannot activate any more cards in the battle phase as well. Essentially, just telling you to not activate anything. And with the cherry on top of being able to summon your Trident Dragion, popping the Sangen Summoning and doubling its attack, given the fact that it's going to attack 2 or 3 times in the same battle phase, essentially makes it that this deck can OTK under Prosperity with almost 40,000 damage. So yeah, Chandra, Sangen Kaiman, also incredibly strong. I chose Sangen Summoning just because of the absurdity of its 3 effects. And number 4, Snake Eyes Poplar. Snake Eyes Poplar was released in Phantom Nightmare, the first core set this year, and it marked the continuation of the Snake Eye and the Abelstar storyline, and it was obviously one of the most significant support to the deck. Wave 1 in Age of Overlord of last year was fine, but obviously Snake Eyes Poplar was the one that really made the deck what it is. And being a poplar, quote unquote, is also a trait that a lot of people already attribute to monsters that, when added from the hand, can special summon themselves. So that's a pretty big achievement within 1 year of seeing play. Snake Eye Poplar, as we said, if added to the hand, except by drawing it, can special summon itself to the field. And if it's summoned, you can add a Snake Eye spell or trap from the deck to the hand. If it is sent to the graveyard, you can target a fire monster in your graveyard and place it in its owner's spell and trap zone as a continuous spell. So, a lot to unpack here. With Snake Eyes Ash being able to search any level 1 Pyro monster, of course, you add your Snake Eye Poplar, that already becomes a really good extender, because on summon, it can search an extender or a starter with the Snake Eye field spell or the original Sinful Spoils. So already, the Snake Eye Ash, given that Snake Eyes Poplar is in the game, is giving you 3 bodies, the ability to extend in whichever way you want, and if you used Bonfire to search for Poplar, you didn't even need to use your normal summon to get a starter for the strongest combo in the game's history. So yeah, this card is extremely powerful. Now what's so good about Snake Eyes Poplar, and was the main problem that probably saw it being limited alongside Snake Eye Ash in the previous balance this year, was the fact that it served as anything that the deck requires. If you normal summon it when original Sinful Spoils was legal, it becomes your starter. If your Snake Eyes Ash gets stopped and you have Bonfire in your hand, you can just search for Poplar, and Poplar can continue the combo from the same exact point. And of course, on summon, search for another extender. So essentially, the deck was pretty impervious to hand traps, given the fact that 3 Diabellstar, 3 Wanted Seeker Sinful Spoils, and Snake Eye Ash could all reach Snake Eyes Poplar, which was the pivotal point that the deck needed to get through in order to continue its combo. And of course, being able to reset fire monsters from the graveyard back into the spell and trap zone means that you always have a fodder for your Snake Eyes monsters to summon the Flambridge from the deck, a fodder for the original Sinful Spoils that doesn't really cost you anything, and returning something like Snake Eyes Diabellstar back into the spell and trap zone after you've used it to tribute for something like Snake Eyes Ash to summon it back and just get another body. This card is probably one of the strongest cards in the Snake Eyes archetype, and it has a reason for being on this list, and also in the Forbidden Limited list as a limited to 1. Number 3, Mulcharmy Flawless. 2024 saw the release of the Mulcharmies, cute little level 4 monsters that you can activate from the hand that are all kind of copies of Max C. the strongest and the most infamous card in Yu-Gi-Oh's history. So, the OCG and their design team decided to break up Maxi into multiple Mulcharmies. Presumably because they want to ban it later this year, but we'll see about that. So you have Mulcharmy Perulia that draws every time your opponent summons from the hand. You have Mulcharmy Meows that is going to be released in Supreme Darkness. And then you have Mulcharmy Flawless, which draws a card every time your opponent special summons from the deck or extra deck, which is arguably the strongest type of Mulcharmy because the extra deck is the place that most decks summon the most from. Not much to say about this card specifically. The Mulcharmies are all really strong, but of course Mulcharmy Flawless, climbing at the top price of like $180 on release, is a game changer. It basically brings the real-life Maxi back into the TCG after being gone since 2017. Mulcharmy Flawless can really either stop your opponent from playing altogether to not give their opponent so much advantage, or give you so much advantage if your opponent decides to actually play. It is pretty obvious to see why this card is one of the strongest released in 2024, and honestly I believe this card is going to be a mainstay in people's main decks and side decks, probably until the end of time or until this card gets hit. At number 2, Fiendsmith Engraver. Released in Infinite Forbidden earlier this year, the Fiendsmith archetype was bound to make a lot of waves in the TCG. After being completely busted in the OCG, people in the TCG took notice and this card was bought out like hotcakes on release in Infinite Forbidden, and for good reason. And this card, up until this very moment of recording the video, basically controls the entire metagame. Fiendsmith Engraver seemingly doesn't have a really strong effect on its own, and it represents a stronger archetype that combines a lot of very powerful monsters, including a Link 1 that we know Konami finds really problematic, and even though it can just add a Fiendsmith spell or trap from the deck to the hand by discarding itself to the graveyard, and can summon itself from the graveyard by shuffling another Light Fiend from the grave back to the deck or extra deck as cost, it is, again, a symbol for the power creep in the game and one of the strongest engines released ever. So remember when Adventure Engine requires you to play like 11 cards in the main deck with like 2 bricks that you never really want to draw? Well, the Fiendsmith Engine requires you to play about 5 or 6 of them in the deck to either get DDD Wave High King Caesar with 2 Solemn Warnings, or Fiendsmith Desiree that is basically an Omni-Negate that can respond to cards like Dark Ruler No More, and when it goes to the graveyard, it can also send any card on the field to the graveyard. So, the Fiendsmith Engraver itself adds the Fiendsmith Tract. Tract can add something like a Fabled Lurie, and then requires you to discard from the hand. You discard the Lurie, Lurie comes back from the graveyard, you go into Fiendsmith Requiem, and then that Requiem gets you another Fiendsmith Engraver from the deck, already amounting for 2 level 6 Fiends in rotation. And this engine, about a month or 2 after release, already saw one of its cards being banned in Fiendsmith Lacrima. The level 6 fusion that basically burns your opponent for 1200 when it hits the graveyard was just too toxic and impressive. So, Fiendsmith Engraver and the Fiendsmith engine can grab out either 2 special summon negates or a very strong Omni negate. It can basically give you 3 bodies on the board just by activating one of their effects. And I think the most important thing and the main reason why this card and this engine are so strong are the fact that they recycle their entire engine back into the deck so you never run out of resources. In a normal card game, resources are meant to be depleted over time. Once you play, you get rid of some of your resources, and eventually you run out and can't use them anymore. If I used all my branded fusions, and I already used the ways to return them like Kit and Branded Retribution, I'm supposed to not be able to play anymore, right? But the Fiendsmith engine shuffles back every single part of their engine as cost back into the deck in order to activate their effect. So essentially, the engine has never-ending gas. And again, every good deck this format is playing Fiendsmith in some way, shape, or form, and in the OCG, Engraver and Tract are already limited to 1. And at number 1, Promethean Princess, Bestower of Flames. This card was a huge surprise. A few months before being released, Promethean Princess Bestower of Flames was used as marketing material on some ads and posters of Master Duel on PlayStation. Then, eventually, Promethean Princess was released in Master Duel before ever being printed either in the OCG or TCG, which was a huge marketing tool for Konami to advertise their physical card game. But upon release, people didn't really see the appeal, right? This was way before Snake Eyes became popular and before the announcements of Phantom Nightmare. So people were using this in decks like Salamangreat, right? Promethean Prince is of course a Link 3 Fire Fiend monster that requires any 2+ effect monsters, already making it completely generic to use. While on the field, it locks you into summoning only fire monsters. Now during your main phase, it can just special summon one fire monster from your graveyard without targeting. And if your opponent's monster is summoned to their field while it's in the graveyard, you can destroy one fire monster you control and one monster your opponent controls, and then you special summon back the princess. Seemingly in the beginning, people didn't really see the appeal of this card, but eventually, this card became a staple in one of the strongest decks ever, and is continuing to be a menace and a problem in any deck that can access fires in any way. And with cards like Hida, the Fire Charmer Ablaze, in a meta that is already full of fires, any 2 fire monsters on your field and an Ash Blossom in your opponent's graveyard turns into Promethean Princess, and used with cards that were popular back in the day like Beatrice Lady of the Eternal that can dump Snake Eye Ash using the Fiendsmith engine. You see how this list combines together? Princess can then revive the Snake Eye Ash completely for free, not restricting you in any way, and starting your very strong Snake Eye combo. So the ability to link climb into a monster that provides an extension or starter with the right cards, and of course an interruption on your opponent's turn, and then protected follow-up in the next turn for summoning back your fire monsters, this card really warped the format. It might not seem like that now after Snake Eyes has died down a little bit, but Promethean Princess being played at almost every single meta deck, even the Tenpai Dragons, really shifted how the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Was played in 2024. And again, you could look at recency bias and say the Mulcharmies and Fiendsmiths are much more in fashion now, but the first 8 months of 2024 were pretty much ruled by Promethean Princess, making it the 3rd most played Link monster in the entire game in 2024, which honestly says a lot. And up until now, people couldn't really decide on whether Promethean Princess was the problem card in Snake Eyes or another 6 different cards that could be the problem card. While it might not be the strongest today, I think that Promethean Princess is the definition of 2024 Yu-Gi-Oh! Thank you so much for watching the top 10 most powerful, strongest cards released in 2024. I know a lot of you have different opinions, so the comment section is right there. Go ahead and put your opinion down below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great rest of your day. We'll see you in the next one. Peace.